Alrighty guys, we're going to start now.
Okay guys,
Alrighty, welcome to lesson 2, welcome to class 2 of Introduction to AutoMechanics. Now, I understand that some of you weren't here because of the hurricane or any other reason. And for that, you'll be happy to know that I did post the previous video on YouTube. But later at the end of the class, I'm going to have to ask you all for your emails so I can send you the links. And don't worry about the whole handouts and everything, because there will be a download for them in the description in the video. Alrighty, so today we're going to, hang on. So last week we were learning what an internal combustion engine was. Now what that basically means is that combustion is another word for explosion, right?
Yes.
So, what that means for an internal combustion engine is that inside the combustion chamber is a controlled explosion that goes off in different timed portions as the engine runs. This week, we're going to be learning about the crankshaft and the main bearings. So, and an easier way to explain how an internal combustion engine works is sort of like three words, like a bike. Because as we said last week, the engine is basically our legs and the pedals to a bike. Because our legs go up and down, just like the pistons in a car, and the pedals are like the crankshaft that drive the wheels. Okay. Today we're also going to be learning how to change a tire. This is going to be one of those lessons where we're going to be learning real life, how to do something today. However, as we said in orientation, we're not actually going to do it. Sorry to disappoint. Okay, then. So now, the crankshaft. Now the crankshaft is the thing that sits below the pistons and below the engine block that turns the pumping motion from the pistons into rotating motion, as I said, like a bike. The crankshaft also has a very smooth surface to connect to the engine block and pass through with little to no friction. And as you can see here by these small little holes, that's where oil gets pumped through to lubricate the entire crankshaft.
and that's inside the house.
That's underneath the engine block. And the way that it works is that it fits lengthwise underneath. So it's like you have one end pointing out the back and one end pointing out of the front of the engine block.
That's a V8, right?
That's any engine.
No, I'm not saying.
Oh,
no,
this
yeah.
block, yes, it's a simple V8 engine.
And how would you know that if you were not a student? Well, if you...
Well, it's kind of pretty simple.
Or you just say you can count these things right here. There's 1, 2, 3.
I'm sorry, but also, I would appreciate it if you would hold your questions to the end of the lesson because we have a lot to cover. Now, at the front of the engine, which is basically the other side of this, that end of the crankshaft here would connect to rubber drive belts that connect to that propel and power any other accessories and any other necessary parts, like the camshafts, which control the valves, or the alternator, which charges the battery in your car. At the rear, here, what goes beyond this is the clutch and gearbox, which is what propels the actual wheels. Now we'll be going on what goes on beyond this crankshaft in a later lesson. Okay? Now, if you look closely here, you'll see little rubber rings here. That's called an oil seal. What that does is that it prevents any oil from leaking from within the oil pan here and from leaking out from the crankshaft even when it's in motion. The way that it works, as I said, it fits around the crankshaft on each end. And now, what are the basic parts of the crankshaft?
Oil.
1, oil seal. What?
Oil seal.
Good. Number 2. Alrighty, you write it you're going to want to write this down in that little diagram that has all the unlabeled parts. Everybody following?
Yes.
Good. Number 2, crankshaft. What?
Crankshaft.
Good. Now, I understand that some of you may be having a hard time understanding this, but keep in mind that as we go on further, the lessons start connecting with each other. Because last week we were talking about the internal combustion engine, and the way that the piston moves is the crankshaft. The crankshaft also has these oil seals that prevent oil from leaking. See what I mean? Alrighty, 3, oil filter. What?
Oil filter.
Good. Now this part, oil filter, is very crucial to the engine. Usually it gets changed every time you get an oil change in your car. What this does is that prevents any like dirt or dust from getting within your engine. Because as we know, that can cause severe damage and can be very expensive. Alright, number 4, block. What?
Block.
As we said last week, the block is probably the most simple part in the entire engine. It's the heart of the engine. And as we said, that is actually a very crudely made part. That's where it houses everything, the cylinders to the little groove for the crankshaft. Number 4, oil pump. What?
Oil pump.
Alrighty. The oil pump is a small little device that attaches to the underside of the engine block and usually reaches down to the bottom of another part. Number 6, oil pan.
Oil pan.
What?
Oil pan.
Good. Oil pan. Now this is the place where all the motor oil gets stored inside of the engine and gets circulated throughout the engine. The oil pan will also have a little bolt or plug threaded into the bottom so you can drain out, so the mechanic or you can drain out the oil for a change. Okay. Next one. 7, crankcase. Now the little hole in the little cavity inside of the oil pan and underneath the engine block is called the crankcase. This is where the crankshaft sits once the engine is fully assembled. All right. 8, lubrication hose. What?
Lubrication hose.
Good. As I said earlier, the lubrication holes are tiny little holes inside of the crankshaft that pump oil throughout the crankshaft, keeping everything running smoothly. 9, bearing surface. What?
Bearing surface.
Bearing surface. Now what this is, the bearing surface is a smooth, polished surface in between the crankshaft and the engine block. And this holds it very firm in place. We will go into this in a few minutes. Alright. 10, balancing lobe. What?
Balancing lobe.
The balancing lobes act as a counterweight throughout the crankshaft, keeping the engine propelling and keeping it fit and keeping it from getting any wobble. Those are the little things that you see on the other end while the piston goes down. So it's like the piston could go down and the lobe would be up. So it's like that. It keeps it moving. Inertia, using something called inertia. That's a very scientific, it's a term that you can learn in physics. What that means is that it's a force that cannot be stopped unless actually has an opposite reaction. The way that it could work is that, let me give you an example. Say you're in your car going about 60 miles. The inertia, when you tap the brakes, you can feel yourself move forward, right?
Right.
That is inertia because you're going to still want to move. Okay. Okay, now the main bearings. What are these? Well, the main bearings are a smooth, semicircular surface that is placed in between the crankshaft here and the engine block. And that provides a very smooth surface that can hold the crankshaft firmly in place while allowing movement. This is basically sort of like a washer. However, while a washer adds friction to keep it hold in place, this actually allows movement. It takes 2 bearings to create a set. One on top, one on the bottom to create a ring. It takes usually 5 or more sets of crankshafts in order to keep the crankshaft in place. And these provide a perfect fit and eliminate wobble even further to assist the lobes, which are these little things right here. They look kind of like a little wedge. And they, as I said, engines usually have 4, 6, or 8 cylinders inside of an engine, either in an inline configuration or a V8. Okay, now we're going to go over the parts of the main bearing. 1. Main bearing set. What?
Main bearing set.
Good. The main bearing set is just 2 of those main bearings held together in between the crankshaft and engine block. 2. Main bearings. What?
Main bearings.
Alright. As we said, the main bearings are a very crucial part that holds the crankshaft in place to prevent any damage. 3. Main bearing caps. What?
Main bearing caps.
Good! Now the main bearing caps are these little parts that you see below, like right at the bottom. Right here. Now what those, like the little bottom part below the main bearings, right here. Now what these do is that they actually hold the main bearings in place. Because you put the main bearings in, the way that it goes is that you put the top bearings in, you put the crankshaft, the lower bearings, and then the bearing caps. Because without those caps, the bearings would just fall off. Alright, give me a second. Okay, number 4, block. What?
Block.
Good! As we said earlier and last week, the block is a very simple part, usually forged from either cast iron or any heavy-duty material. 4. Oh yeah, okay, there we go. We also have a little video to help review in case for those who weren't here last week or may have forgotten. So come on, could you like it? And hope you all enjoy.
Today, the internal combustion engine is used in motorcycles, automobiles, boats, trucks, aircraft, ships, heavy-duty machinery, and power generators. A 4-stroke engine is an internal combustion engine in which the piston completes 4 separate strokes: intake, compression, power, and exhaust during 2 separate revolutions of the engine's crankshaft and 1 single thermodynamic cycle. Let's take a look at the basic internal parts of a 4-stroke engine. Inside the engine block, there is a crankshaft. Piston rods are attached to crankshaft. Pistons are attached to the piston's rods. As the crankshaft turns, it causes the lifter to make each piston move up and down. At the top of the crankshaft there is a camshaft which is connected to the crankshaft by a timing belt. While the crankshaft is making the pistons move up and down, the camshaft is turning, making the valves to open and close. Let's now take a look at how the combustion creates pistons motion. First, intake stroke. The inlet valve is opened, and the fuel-air mixture is drawn in as the piston travels down. Second, compression stroke. The inlet valve is closed, and the piston travels back up the cylinder, compressing the fuel-air mixture. Just before piston reaches the top of its compression stroke, a spark plug emits a spark to combust the fuel-air mixture. Third, combustion stroke. The piston is now forced down by the pressure wave of the combustion of the fuel-air mixture. The engine's power is derived from this cycle. Fourth, exhaust stroke. The exhaust valve is opened, and the piston travels back up, expelling the exhaust gases through the exhaust valve. At the top of the stroke, the exhaust valve is closed. This process is repeated. What had been presented is the cycle of operation of one cylinder of a 4-stroke engine. Generally, engines have 2 or more cylinders acting in concert with each other to produce the engine power.
Alrighty, Dad, you can stop the video.
That's very good.
Just give me a second. Really quickly, before we go how we're going to change a tire, I would love to take any questions, if you have any. Come on, don't be shy. There's not going to be any critique here, come on.
Somebody's got to have one question.
Exactly, somebody's gotta. Yeah?
What would happen if you use oil in place of gasoline?
Well, the engine would explode, to put it bluntly. Yes?
You're gonna try that now, aren't you?
Yeah.
Do not try this at home. Yeah?
Well, what happens if the alternator's not working and you're trying to start the car?
It'll still work because it'll actually take power from the battery. But it will drain your battery very fast. That's actually what happened to our car, actually not last year.
What happens if you use gasoline in the oil pan instead of oil?
Well, it wouldn't exactly blow up, but the engine would probably rust and break. Yeah?
Why do we need to change our car battery if the car battery can be recharged by driving?
Because it's just somewhat kind of like changing the batteries in like a TV remote. You know how sometimes it has like that acid coming out of it? The same thing can happen to a car battery. Because to put it bluntly, a car battery is basically a bigger version of a simple AA. Many different factors can determine when it's time to change your battery, like age, a leak perhaps. Like you can tell if there's like a leak or if it's a lot of heat, if the battery becomes bloated. That can usually point to its age. And something else that can point out for you when it's time to get a battery change is that, you know, sometimes when you start your car and it goes like zit, zit, like very slowly, that usually means it's time to change it.
And you're driving down the road and you hit this big rock and you don't think there's a problem, and then you have these drips of oil. What did I just put a hole in?
You would have most likely put a hole inside of the oil pan or something, or any other fluid, and it's usually recommended to pull over and call for help.
Yeah.
I will be happy to take like one or two more questions before we get into this. Yeah?
What if, like, you said the pistons in the engine, what if, let's just say there was something like a screw or something that was in the piston while it was revolving? What would happen to it when they exploded?
Well, it would break the engine. To put it very simply, it would break the engine and possibly beyond repair. That's why you have stuff like the air filter and the oil filter. These things prevent stuff like that getting into the engine.
But what portions of the piston would break?
Well, the top of the piston would probably be warped, like the metal would warp itself. Same with and the combustion chamber would crack.
Did you put cooking oil in a car?
Well, actually, believe it or not, some people actually can run their car usually using alternative methods. Like the famous actor Arnold Schwarzenegger, no trademark, actually used fry oil.
Recycle.
Because you can actually recycle those things, and it's actually it can produce a very big profit.
Don't they have to adjust the...
Composition of it? Yeah, you will most likely have to like re-refine it. But yes, you could possibly use that. Any other questions? Alrighty, now we're going to get into something that you've all really been honestly waiting for. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah.
How to change a tire. Now, you're going to need 6 things here, as stated inside. You're going to need a car jack, which usually comes with the car, and it's usually hidden somewhere. You're going to need some gloves because you don't want to hurt yourself or get dirty. You're going to need a jack stand, which can be used to hold up the car. You're going to need the spare tire, which everybody, hang on, I'll get to you in a second, which every single car has. You're going to need a tire iron to actually loosen it, or if you're in your garage and actually have pneumatic tools, you can use something called a torque wrench. Okay, now, if you know what you're doing and know how to change a tire, that could possibly save your life. Because it can also save you, it can save you a lot of time and money for waiting for a tow truck to take it to the mechanic and wait a few days because they can delay. Now, when you're teaching your child or teenager how to change a tire, you need to observe them, you need to make sure they're watching very closely so they don't get hurt or the vehicle doesn't get damaged. Alrighty, here's a little tip. In the spare tire, when you're checking the pressure of your tires, you always want to check your spare because you don't want to have to all of a sudden say you're in the middle of I-4 going 60 and you blow a tire. And you need to change it and only find out that you have a flat or under-pressured spare tire. That's no good. Okay, here we go. Step 1. Now, how exactly do you handle a blowout or a flat tire in the middle of a highway? This is the first thing to teach your child or teenager. When you're in a highway speeds like doing 60 in the middle of I-4, which if we're all lucky that happens. The best thing to do, number 1, do not panic. You are not going to die.
Hold on to the steering wheel.
Keep a firm grip on the wheel and let the car slow down on its own. Do not touch the brakes. Because if you touch the brakes, the tire is actually going dum, 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 it's not keeping its form. So you could possibly rip the tire and cause even further damage. You only need to press your brakes when you're ready to stop. As the car slows down and goes to a safe speed, just pull over to the shoulder on the road, usually either on the right or left sides. And once it is safe to exit the vehicle, keep in mind for traffic, usually go around the side that is furthest from the road, and then go get your car jack and your spare tire, which is usually in the back, inside or underneath the car. And remember, as I said, keep an eye out for traffic, because you don't want to have to, all of a sudden you're walking through, about to get your tire, and then all of a sudden a car comes by. And then somebody ends up losing a foot. Step 2, remove the hubcap. Now keep in mind, not all cars have a hubcap. Some of them could actually have rims, yes?
What's a hubcap?
A hubcap is that little thing. Let me give you an example. My dad's Fiat 500 has a hubcap which usually covers the 5 bolts inside, which usually covers these bolts inside of a car. I honestly don't know why they put that there, probably just for style. But a hubcap usually sits on top right here hiding the bolts. After retrieving the spare tire, car jack, and tire iron, hang on a second, I see you there. And after you remove the way you can remove the hubcap is that usually the little tool that you get with your car jack has a little wedge to gently pry off the hubcap. Kind of like a crowbar, only easy. Okay, now, you can't just pop off the hubcap just by going, you need to work your way around. Sort of like you're peeling something. You need to keep going until it just pops off. Once that is off, you're going to want to keep it in a safe place, usually within the car itself, or if it's small enough, in your pocket. That's what I do. And tip, as we said here in the tools, you should always wear gloves when doing this, because inside of the tire, there's little steel wires that help keep the tire, that keeps the shape of the tire. And those can be pretty sharp. So, that is why you wear gloves. You do not want to get hurt by that at all. Okay. Step 3. You're going to want to loosen these lug nuts. That's a technical term. These 5 little lug nuts should come off with relative ease, and you're going to want to loosen them up a bit before actually putting it on the jack. Because once the car is actually jacked up, tire is going to want to keep moving because there's nothing holding it to the ground and in place. And now, step 4. Oh, also, really quickly, a reason why you also want to loosen the lug nuts while it's still on the ground is that if it's in the air, not only will the tire spin, but there could be a lot of wobble, and it could potentially fall off. I've heard many stories of which they made that mistake and it ended up costing them their lives. Okay, step 4. You're going to want to actually use the car jack and lift up the car once the lug nuts are actually loosened. After the car is lifted up, then you can loosen up the lug nuts completely and take off the tire.
Where do you place the jack?
The jack, you can either place it underneath here, over the side, like under the side, or you can place it up front. But it depends on like the car and the position of the tire.
Read the car manual.
And yeah, you're also going to want to read the operator's manual. I know people don't like reading, but this could possibly help you out. So don't just look it over and then toss it in the glove box, never to be opened again. You're going to want to read it. Alrighty, now once you remove the lug nuts, you're going to want to keep them in a safe place because, after all, you do not want to lose those things. Because you could be changing your tire, and what if you're missing a lug nut? And you find it off on the other side of the road. I mean, you're not going to want to walk across the road with a bunch of cars here, like with a bunch of cars coming by and not even noticing, let alone caring. Alrighty, step 5. You're going to want to lower your car onto a jack stand. Now, what some of you may not have a jack stand, this is usually when you're working in your garage. A jack stand is a little piece of metal that can be cranked up and can hold the actual car in place better than the actual jack.
Is that what it
Yeah, these two things right here are jack stands.
Okay. They don't go up and down, they just...
No, you just twist a little crank and it goes up. And unless it has a little release valve that if you push it, then it will go down. But other than that, it will stay in place. Tip of advice, never use those little ramps that they have. Like, you know those little wooden blocks?
Yeah.
Never use those. Those are more dangerous than... These things can provide a safer environment. Because there have been several instances when the car has rolled off the ramps. Nobody wants to go chasing after a car.
It could make a good funny video, though.
Alrighty, step 6. You're going to want, hang on a second, let me just tell. Step 6, here's where you actually put on the spare tire. This is when the car is still on the jack stand and lifted, getting all the heavy lifting done. Once you're going to want to be extremely delicate and precise with putting the tire in, because if you're not very careful and put the bolts in any way you want, the tire could become unbalanced and cause a lot of problems. So the way that I learned it is that, so a car usually has 5 lug nuts in the tires. You go like a star pattern. One at the top, down here, up again, there, and there. And then that should work. Not to mention it's kind of faster. And one quick thing really that I want to mention. If you ever need to jack up the car higher or lower, feel free to do so, but do it at your discretion. And you do not need to actually lower the car to fully tighten the lug nuts. It's actually better if it's jacked up still. But you're going to want to tighten them so much that they're like, ting, 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 that you can't move them without actually using force. Because if you over tighten it, it could possibly stretch the actual stud there, and you'll need to get new bolts, which are kind of expensive. Alrighty. As I said before, you're going to want to be sure that you always do, when you do one, you're going to want to do the bolt, like when you tighten a bolt, you're gonna want to tighten the next one that is opposite to it. So it's like if you have a bolt on the left, you're not gonna want to tighten the bolt on top. You're gonna tighten the bolt that is to the right, like a star pattern. You can, if you're in your garage also and you have a pneumatic system, you can set a torque wrench to 80 to 85 pounds per foot to get the right amount of tightness. Now everyone's asking what a torque wrench is. It's that little thing that kind of looks like a gun, and it goes like, that you see race car teams use. That goes like, and it starts clicking once it's tightened. You can either use that or a simple tire iron, which usually comes with the car. Then again, you need to read your owner's manual. Alright, so that's pretty much it. Really quickly before the lesson ends, I can take any more questions. Yeah?
What if, like, let's say if you have a semi and it breaks and the tire is flat, you have to park it at the side. What type of car jack do you have to use?
Well, you don't need to worry about that much because usually the car jack comes with the car. So it's like, for a semi, I'll most likely have like a heavy duty one. Either that or you're gonna probably have to call like a tow truck, because I honestly don't really know that much about trucks versus cars. Yeah?
Well, I have a question about U-Haul tires, blowing off the road, ball tires. Do you use a regular jack to lift the truck up?
As I said to him, usually the car jack comes with the car itself, but then again, you also need to check your owner's manual to see if it has it.
Usually with semis, they have the
Oh my God. Okay, Ham, what is your question again?
Oh, it wasn't a question. He was asking about the semis, and usually the semis have the double tires just in case one goes out and it's spare.
Yeah, but does anybody have a question not relating to a semi? And an actual question. Alrighty.
What makes the difference between black exhaust that you can see come out of a car and clear exhaust?
Well, that depends on the fuel because diesel has a pretty black and ashy cloud, which is very toxic, by the way. Do not breathe that in. Or gasoline, which usually gives off a clear emission depending on the actual muffler and catalytic converter, which is actually a filter. I saw you had a question?
So here's my issue with changing tires.
Mm-hmm.
My tires put on by Firestone. I'm going down I-4 at 60 and boom, right? I didn't know about not putting the brake on because your immediate reaction is put the brake on. So now I have to learn not to put the brake on.
Yeah.
So I go out to go change the tire, got my jack going out, got all that stuff. I put my, what is that thing, the turn on? What is it called? Yeah, you got it, it's iron, something.
Oh, the tire iron.
Tire iron, okay, to get my bolt. It's down. I cannot move that puppy. How do you do it?
Well,
Why did you ask me?
You weren't there.
I guess it depends on like,
Leveraging.
it's usually best that you use a lot of leverage and actually put your back into it, to put it bluntly.
What happens if you like put all your strength in it and you try everything you can think of, but it doesn't work?
Use your foot.
I said everything you can think
Stand
of.
on that. Stand on it.
Or you
Or you can call a torque, or you can call a tow truck, or possibly ask for help.
Use it. Everything. Sit on it.
Alrighty, any other questions?
Then we have to put all this stuff back in the car.
Yes? Mm-hmm.
My mom had this saloon, her tire actually blew out on a highway before.
Ooh.
We got stuck for hours because she did not know how to change the tire and my dad did not feel like changing the tire. So,
To avoid that, you gotta call for help.
yeah.
If you're not willing to change a tire, or you don't know how, you gotta call a tow truck. Yeah?
But one time, me and my parents, or me and my mom and my sister went into Target, and the tire when we were in there for like 5 minutes, we came out, the tire was slashed. So someone came up and slashed our tire.
Oh my god.
And for the, huh?
You got some enemies.
Yeah.
Yes, if that happens, you've got some serious
It wasn't
enemies.
just us, it was that kind of like in a pie pattern. It was slash, safe, or car no slash, and then slash. It was kind of like in that pattern for 2 rows.
That's pretty weird.
Yeah, for some reason, and then we were trying to do it, and with the
Right.
tire iron,
hmm
and it won't move. And I'm like, Mom, put the car down. And she had lifted it up with the tow.
Oh my god.
And I'm like, Mom, put it down.
You gotta put the car down when you loosen it.
But my mom, she's so stubborn, she wouldn't. So I'm like,
Well, tell her that I say that you need, and this is coming from a guy who knows how to do it.
Right.
You're gonna want to keep the car on the ground as you're loosening it, but once they're like loose, then you can lift it up.
yeah, and then I did it when she wasn't looking, and I just sat on it, and it went down.
And just remember, it's the same thing as like screwing in a normal screwdriver.
Oh, yeah, you gotta go
Righty
back.
tighty, lefty loosey.
Right.
That's how I learned it.
What happens if you have like 2 tires out and you have 1 spare? Do you like
Well,
Call a tow truck.
simple?
Simple.
Or do you
Yeah.
go,
Is there any way to tell before your tire blows out? Like, is there a sound it makes so you know you need to get over really quickly, or is it just when it blows?
Well, it could also be like overpressured. You could kind of feel it like either like you can feel like one end going up or down. Not to mention it also could be kind of hard to steer. Like, say if you have a blowout in your front left tire, so that's the passenger side. Well, front right tire. I mean, that's the passenger side. If that's flat, like starting to get old, the car's gonna want to veer to the right. So you have to kind of like keep adjusting it. Then again, it's always good to check your tires
yes.
before you go.
Could you go over what causes a change in the tire pressure?
Well, usually wear and tear, it's sort of like a bike tire. The more you use it, or actually not using it, could make it a little bit flatter because, you know, the air will obviously kind of find a small way to get out.
Does temperature play a factor?
Yes, temperature can play an extreme factor because, well, it depends on the tire. Because if you have like a long life, heavy duty tire, it can usually take some pretty high temperatures. But if you have like a pretty simple old, like maybe like a 6-month-old tire in your car, too much temperature could possibly pop it. Because the way that the heat, what happens is that as it gets hotter, the rubber actually kind of gets sticky, which actually helps grip. And the air also expands, creating more pressure.
And then when it's cold, it drops.
Yeah?
what if the tire gets too cold? Would that affect it?
Probably not, actually. If anything, it would probably just make your car a little bit less grippy because the rubber isn't as sticky and it won't actually grip the road.
Let's say you're in a car and you're going up an icy mountain, and
Oh. Been there, done that.
been there, done that.
Been there, done
And
that.
your
Buffalo
car,
2014.
and your car's about to, and your car explodes, like your car trying to explode out in the middle of nowhere, and you're in the middle of nowhere on a mountain. How can you, and you know, carjack, what would you do?
You would be going down like
Either, I honestly don't know because I haven't been in a situation like that. But if you have any reception, which you usually do, depending on your carrier, it will be best to call for help.
And park your car in the neighborhood, not straight up and down.
Really quickly, before I actually answer any more questions, just keep in mind that you will need to study this because eventually we will be having a knowledge test. So you can find out how much you actually know. And I will also be posting the videos of the actual lesson and me answering your questions on YouTube. Yeah?
Okay, so this is just something that happened to me, but I'd like to know what part of the engine blew. So I was going go-karting, and the engine started making like
Like a kind of like a loud racket, right?
yes, a loud racket sound, and then the car just started slowing down, and then 5 seconds later, boom, the engine explodes and just lights on fire. What do you think caused that?
Well, a multitude of factors could have caused that. Like for one, the oil pressure could have, like some oil could have leaked into the engine, causing it to actually expand and crack. That's what possibly could have caused the fire. Another factor could maybe something, maybe like a bolt got loose or a screw, and the engine started knocking.
To go along with his story, does revving up the engine do that? Like when you want to try to show off, like.
It depends on how much you're revving, because if you're like redlining the car to the point where it's like you gotta be careful with that, because that can cause some serious damage.
But would it make the engine catch on fire?
No, it won't. It will just blow the engine. You'll just hear a loud thump, and then it shuts off. Any other questions, or is that it? Oh, they're passing around a paper, just so you know, and you're going to want to write your email there. And your name too. So that way I know. Print. In print. That way it's easy.
Sorry.
Talking to you, Chris.
I'm like, what is that letter?
Use your mom's email.
Right.
Just tell me that it's your mother's email. Ask her. But yeah, the reason I ask for your emails is so that way I can send you the links to the video. And to end this off, I have a quote from a very important person to me, and a very well-known man. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. This was quoted by Leonardo da Vinci, a very well-known Renaissance man / inventor. So I'm happy to be your teacher this week and for the next few weeks coming on. Thank you for this awesome class. You guys are the best.